I'm Rick Bassman.
And I'm Amanda Kelly, and we're both cancer survivors, warriors, thrivers.
I was diagnosed at 16, stage 4, and given 6 months to live. 4 major surgeries and 3 years of chemotherapy hell later, I made it through. And for years afterwards, I was angry at the world. I was defeated, and although I wasn't dead, I felt like my life was over.
I traveled a bit of a different road. Diagnosed stage 2B with a grapefruit-sized growth in my chest, immediately I saw the reason for what I was experiencing and the opportunity in it. To become that person I always wanted to be. The one who believes in herself wholly and who wanted to dedicate her life to helping others uncover that inner faith and resilience.
It took me a long time to understand that Amanda's way is not only the right way, the better way, but when it comes right down to it, the only way.
Life is a beautiful and blessed gift. I believe that and feel that with every fiber of my being, and my mission is to help others to create that same gift for themselves. This gift is available to everyone who is ready to receive it.
Today, I'm healthier and I'm wealthier in mind, body, and spirit than I ever imagined possible. When challenges arise, things that once seemed insurmountable, I now see them immediately as opportunities to become even stronger.
No matter what you are facing, you have that same strength inside of you. Together, as the Cancer Warriors, we are here to lend whatever wisdom and experience we can.
To see your challenge as an opportunity, no matter what you're facing.
No matter how impossible it may seem. To help guide you to go
from surviving to thriving.
Please join Rick Bassman and Amanda Kelly for a new episode of the Cancer Warriors podcast every Friday right here on Podcast One. Also available on Spotify, Apple, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts.
All right, sorry, let's start over. And here we are on our very first episode of the Cancer Warriors. John Paz, our great producer, thank you for that amazing introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be doing this. I'm here with, I want to say, my good friend, Amanda Kelly, who I've never actually met in person before. We have this long distance friendship buddy thing going. Amanda, so glad to see you today. How are you doing?
Great. Yeah, it's so amazing to be here. Yeah, we've never met in person, but I feel like I've known you for years. Well, I have known you for years, but I feel like I know you in person almost. It's funny how the interwebs can do that these days.
Isn't it? And it'll be even more so that way now that we're doing this every week. Since we're about to have this gigantic show that we're going to influence and help so many people with. Right?
Yes. I'm so excited to get into this because we've both had our journeys and that's what connected us in the first place. And there's just so much to say about this world and going through it. So yeah, there's so much we can get into, and I just can't wait for this to evolve and for it to grow and for it to serve.
And all of the above. Check to all of the above. This is for those watching, and hopefully there are many of you. This is our first episode. This is our introductory episode. And Amanda and I thought it would be a good start to have just the two of us on, talk to you a little bit about why we're doing this and a little bit of our own experiences, where we were, where we are now, and where we hope to be as we progress in our journeys. So as Amanda said, lots to get into. We agreed, I'm sharing mine and Amanda's private conversation now with you all. We agreed that we were not going to do this by script or by agenda. We both like to flow. So we're going to do our best to inspire. And Amanda, why are you doing this podcast? Can you share that?
Yeah, well, this idea of sharing our stories keeps coming up, and people connect through stories throughout history. Going back, people learned through myth, through story, through legend. It's through archetypal representation that we have learned and grown and evolved as civilization. So naturally, we connect individually through stories. So hearing somebody else's story about what they've gone through that may parallel your experience, I find is so, so valuable. And that was the feedback that I was getting when I started sharing publicly what I was going through 7.5 years ago or so. When I was diagnosed, I made the decision to share publicly that I had been diagnosed, that I was going through chemo, that I was going through this insane thing at the age of 30. And I had always been a very private person, honestly. Like, I shared little tidbits here and there, but social media. And all of a sudden, there I was sharing this very vulnerable stuff. And at the same time, it just felt like the most natural thing to do. Like, of course. And people started reaching out to me personally saying, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for enlightening me about what it was like to actually be the patient, because my father, my brother, my sister went through it. And people who were going through it themselves started finding me. And so that point of connection, of not feeling alone, of knowing that other people have gone through it and can resonate. And then, of course, having come out the other side, it's like, well, how did we get here? And what did we do? Like, those are hugely important pieces to be sharing, because honestly, for me personally, I felt like the healing journey truly began after treatment ended. And I had no idea what lay ahead of me. And it was both way more intense than I imagined, but also far more beautiful, because I totally embraced the full healing journey that was laid out for me, because it was actually truly very liberating on very profound levels. So in a nutshell, that's why I felt really compelled to say yes when you asked if I wanted to be a co-host on the show. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that feels so good. And it's my 7-year mark. Actually, this coming week, as we're recording, is my 7-year remission anniversary. So it feels like very, very beautiful, aligned timing to be doing this as well, because 7 years, the whole body regenerates, you become a whole new person at a cellular level. So it feels like a massive, massive threshold. So yeah, I'm super honored to be sharing this and be here. So thank you again, Rick, for asking me to be part of this with you, because truly it's an honor.
No, of course, and it's so great to have you here with me, because I feel like you're such a like we're counterparts almost, and that compliment is all to you, because as opposed to myself, because I look at how you've handled your journey and how it's out there. And by the way, folks, when I say out there, Amanda has an amazing platform called This Art Called Life at thisartcalledlife.com. Check it out, please, when you get a chance. And you've built a big following. You're inspiring a lot of people, and I see your voice and the way you portray yourself, and it's real and it's grounded, but it's very positive, and that I think that helps a lot of people. And I think we'll probably end up interviewing each other a lot, maybe even on today's episode, to see what our experiences were like and how we handled it. What I know of you through our many conversations is you handled it. I mean, you had your challenges for sure, and I'm sure you had your fears. I'm sure there were some rough times, maybe a lot of them, but I guess the way I would describe you through it all was like bright and sunny. I took the opposite path, and I was diagnosed at 16 with stage 4 cancer. I was at one time given a 6-month survival prognosis, and it was obviously they were wrong about that, because here I am all these decades later. It was a brutal 3 years, and I did not handle it well. And I take full discredit for that. That's on me. I've learned a lot since then. And I think what I've learned now allows me to help people that might be really, really in the dark, thinking they don't have a chance, thinking they cannot survive. And these are people that are either in it or have survived it, but feel like they barely got through it and now their lives are over. And you and I know that, you and I know there's always a chance to come back even stronger than you were before, which is why we have this great tagline, from surviving to thriving. I think that really says it all.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that came to me a while ago. Well, actually, I was going through treatment, and I feel like other people have had that same tagline for various different things over the years. I've seen that floating around, but I was playing around on Instagram with hashtags when I realized, oh, people can find each other through this stuff. It was really the cancer diagnosis that allowed me to explore what was possible when you use social media to your benefit. And I realized there were specific hashtags for cancer. There were specific hashtags for lymphoma. I was diagnosed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, primary mediastinal B-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, for anybody out there who might have gone through the same. And we'll get into the nuances of our particular diagnoses and all that. But I was looking through these hashtags, and it's like predictive when it comes up. Cancer survivor was the first one that I was putting in, but I noticed there was cancer warrior, cancer thriver, and it was the thriver that I really resonated with, because I was like, you know what? I don't want to resonate. I don't want to identify as a survivor, because there's an empowerment that comes from it, but it also has this duality where we're in survival mode. And in general, society has been in survival mode, in scarcity, in lack, in suffering. And in my humble opinion, we are meant to transcend that. That is not how we're meant to live in survival mode. We're meant to live beautiful, abundant, expansive lives, but our conditioning, our program, the trauma going back for a long time, it really keeps us in this state of constantly needing to perform and to do, and burnout and stress has become the norm for our modern Western society. And that's, I think, a huge contributing factor for so many, whether it's cancer or other chronic dis-ease. And for me, I know that it was a primary catalyst for my diagnosis, because I had been so stressed out. I had been burnt out and dealing with crazy insomnia. And it took a couple more years, honestly. It's a whole other conversation. We can talk about it another time. But to find out I actually had adrenal fatigue, adrenal burnout, like there's a real physiological basis to burnout. It's not just like feeling tired. There's hormonal issues underlying it. And so, yeah, it just really resonated, this thriver idea, because I was like, yeah, I'm going to thrive. And you mentioned that whole thing. I won't make this a huge long tangent, but you mentioned that idea of the doctors gave you 6 months to live. In my humble opinion, that is one of the worst things doctors can do for the patients, is to quote unquote give them a set amount of time to survive. It is, honestly, they've done research on this. This isn't me just saying this wantonly, that when patients are given a particular date and they identify with that, it is astonishing how many people will go on that date or within a week of it, or even sometimes in less time if they really, really just have given up. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you want to get into psychology, that's what I studied. And our beliefs are powerful. Our mindset is so powerful. And so you were saying at 16, you handled it very differently. Well, I was 30. So I had the benefit of having studied psychology. I had the benefit of having a bunch of tools under my belt that I didn't have when I was 16 years old. So you can give me credit for that. Awesome. I'll take it. Thank you. But I also had that benefit of having more of that experience, of having studied positive psychology, of having studied mindset and all of that. And I had 3 yoga teaching certifications under my belt. And like, people looked at me like, you're the healthiest person I know. How did this happen? And that is when I realized there were so many missing pieces to the puzzle of what it means to be healthy. So, anyway, I went on a few different tangents there, but that's just it, is like really getting a clearer picture of what does it mean truly to thrive. And that's, I think, going to be the foundation of the entire podcast. Every episode we do is probably going to steer it in this direction of creating a life for ourselves that is really based on that notion of expanding our horizons and thriving, and not just going through the motions and getting by. That's anyway how I resonate with it. And what about you, Rick? Because I think you said it before I even chimed in and was like,
we kind of came to the same place together, I think, all these years later. I'm 100% completely in agreement with you. And I have to do my qualifier, folks. I have 4 pit bulls, and they sometimes will just interrupt these things. So if you hear that, my apologies. We'll just push through it. And speaking of pushing through it, that's what I did when I was diagnosed. And you mentioned cancer warrior. You saw that a lot. That's always been my mentality. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to judge anybody or anything, but if I were, I would say that's kind of the wrong mentality. Thriver, what you're talking about, in my humble opinion, is what it all should be about. And you had an amazing journey, as I believe I did as well, but they were 2 entirely different things. I mean, back when I had it, the internet was like a distant thing in the future, didn't exist. Mm-hmm. A guy going to see a psychologist, you'd be like a sissy if you did that. And those are the kind of words that were used back then. I did make a trip up north to San Francisco to see these amazing people named Shakti Gawain and Jerry Jampolsky. They're the Love is Letting Go of Fear authors, and they're 2 of the first in this space. I spent a weekend with them. I came away inspired, and then I lost it and went right back into that dark warrior survival sort of mode. And I fought for 3 years. I fought my doctors. I fought myself. You mentioned the word dis-ease, and this is a big one for me to take responsibility for. People say, how the heck did you get testicular cancer at age 16? Because that's an old man's disease usually. And then how did you end up with a whole separate lung cancer diagnosis? Were you smoking heavily? Were you in a pollution-filled area? Do you have a huge family history? And the answers to all of those questions were resounding no's. And I came to the realization years later, in one of my many self-diagnoses, I'm always diagnosing myself with anything that's going on, that I gave it to myself. And you break the word down, dis-ease. So I was not at ease. My mom had died suddenly 3 years before. I went to a Catholic school. I was the only Jewish kid in the whole school, and not the shortest boy, but the shortest kid, period. And I was physically attacked my first day of school. This was 6 months after my mother died because I was Jewish and short. And I fought every single day for that first year. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's not an exaggeration. And it ended up, believe it or not, being fun, and I made friends, and that's a whole nother story. It's about coming back from the abyss, right? But no wonder now, looking back, not having any outlets to process, to end up where I ended up. And Amanda, I think you're such an inspiration to follow. I hope that these days I am as well. I do have a platform like yourself that I've been working on for a few years, on and off. Unfortunately, more off than on lately, but this is now changing with what we're doing. My mentality has since changed. And now it is all about, when I say taking responsibility for ourselves, the last thing we want to do is put more stress on anybody that is in the middle of their own journey. but understanding that we do have the power to influence our own journey, our own outcome, and learning how to take advantage of all these modalities and all these support systems that are out there. Part of which I hope we're going to be able to provide to many people.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up a number of really important points that I want to touch on. But first, that notion of self responsibility, a lot of people perceive it to be blaming the patient who's already dealing with so much. And for me, it's not at all that. It is not at all about adding a layer of burden or blame or shame. Like you did this to yourself. No, no, no. Because obviously,
sorry to interrupt. Please don't think I meant that by self-responsibility, of
yeah,
course. It was
yeah.
just the idea
I
that
know you didn't mean that, but for anybody listening, because I know that is a massive trigger point for a lot of people in this world. I've seen it on social media. It has nothing to do with that. It's actually entirely empowering and liberating to be able to take agency over the steps you can take to heal your life. And this is unfortunately the way our society has been constructed, is that we have been taught, and so this is why we don't blame or shame anybody. We did not learn what it means to be healthy and how to heal. We didn't learn any of this. All we were taught was to give our power away to the people in the white lab coats, which is extremely disempowering. We're outsourcing our expertise to somebody who doesn't even know us, is really truly what's happening. And while they may be the expert on the particular disease and diagnosis, I do believe Western medicine is incredibly powerful in its diagnostic capacity. And there are, emergency life-saving procedures that we should 100% be thankful for. And I see that there are a lot of gaps and flaws in the way disease is handled. And there's so many rabbit holes to go down here, but I just want to really anchor that in for anybody listening who might have been triggered by that idea, that taking responsibility for yourself and the role that you play in the life that you have, or the physical disease that you may be experiencing, we don't blame or shame, because there's so much that we haven't been taught. And when we realize that we are powerful enough to change that changes the game entirely. That there are a lot of action steps that we can take on our own. That's so liberating, actually. And that's how things change. And that's how things really evolve and expand. And that's how our body actually begins to heal itself, because we have self-healing mechanisms built in through our immune system. I mean, look at skin. It regenerates however many days, and every organ regenerates every however many years, right? We know this based on biology. This is what we learn in Biology 101. Biology was my favorite science, so I can get a little bit nerdy about it. But when we really start to look at the functioning of cells, understanding disease in the body takes on a whole other meaning. It is not something out there that is as much of a mystery as a lot of cancer has been made out to be. Of course, cancer is a little bit more of a nebulous one, but when I forgot that you also had lung cancer. And when you said just now that your mother had passed away, well, in Chinese medicine, any issues associated with the lungs are rooted in grief, according to their system.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, no, I didn't smoke, no, I didn't do any of that, but you experienced a really profound loss, that ties it all together. And it's not saying that everybody who experiences a loss is going to get cancer.
No.
But it's how did you deal with it? How are you, what tools do you have in order to process the grief? And this is, again, getting back into what you said about men not having that outlet. And there was ongoing stress in your system because of that combativeness that was going on in your life. Well, that's how things take root. If it's an ongoing situation, if it's very extreme and we don't have an outlet, this is how it it essentially densifies into the physical. It densifies into the cells, the tissues of our body, and they can't handle it. So then there's so many different perspectives on this, but yeah, it's really profound what you shared there. So yeah, I hope that makes sense what I said so far.
You hope that makes sense. That was so incredibly articulate. Really. Yeah. No, it makes great sense. And I would think that anybody listening out there now, I would hope they maybe already would have got some of the following. Someone listening that has something going on in their lives or did related to cancer, whether it's themselves or a loved one. Uh, I would hope they'd understand that there always is a way. First, we need to understand what's going on and what our part in it is. Secondly, taking advantage of all these modalities that you're talking about and alluding to, whether it's this Cancer Warriors podcast or Great Western Medicine or any number of support groups that are available these days, including for men, thankfully. Now that's okay. Men are coming together all the time over diagnoses and working on surviving and thriving together. So you speak so beautifully and so eloquently. I tend to be a little more boom, straight to it, lay terms, although your stuff is very easy to digest, everything you're saying. For me, it's this, folks, no matter what you might be going through, no matter what your loved one might be going through or what you have gone through and wondering where you're going to go now, look at Amanda and where she has come. I mean, this is genuinely one of the most positive, brightest people I know. This person had cancer 7 years ago. Many decades ago, I was all but given up for dead. And it was horrific. I did not get anything positive out of the journey during the time I went through it. But I can tell you since then, I've gone on to live what I would term a great life. I'm happy. I'm positive. I'm healthy. I'm strong. I think I'm in a much better shape than most guys 10 years younger than me. Had to throw that in there. Yeah, so there's always a way through. And whatever we can do to help alleviate some of the stress of where you are today and help see a vision for your healthy future in which you're thriving, that's what we're here for. That's what I want to do, Amanda.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And like the core of this is that there's a lot of hope. There's actually a lot more hope than many people realize, because there's different alternatives available for us in how we even just perceive what is going on. I always look at the Chinese character. It's funny, I've mentioned the Chinese stuff twice now, and I haven't studied that in depth or anything, but the Chinese character for crisis, when you flip it upside down, crisis becomes opportunity. And it's all a matter of our internal perspective. It takes a perspective shift. And again, this is psychology. And this is one of the things that I studied in grad school, because I studied social and cultural psychology, not therapy, to be really clear. But shifting our perspective, shifting our mindset on a situation can completely change the game. Immediately, I took this on as a challenge and an opportunity I was like, it is my mission to heal myself and to survive, because 7 family members before me had passed away from cancer and cancer related complications in my dad's immediate family. And my sister was getting married in 6 months, and it's just the 2 of us in our family. And it was my baby sister. And I was like, I cannot do that to my family, because my uncle had passed away the night before I got my CT scan. And it was actually, I consider him to be one of my angels, because he passed away so the doctors had quote unquote given him 6 months after he went off a clinical trial. I can't even remember what he had. It was one of those trickier ones. I don't know if it was pancreas, but it was something like that. But they had given him 6 months after he went off the clinical trial. And he went within 3 days. So it was a bit of a shock, even though we all knew it was coming. We were hoping he would make it to my sister's wedding, honestly. And that night that he passed away, I woke up with super sharp shooting pain in my left shoulder. And I'd already had a cough and some pain in my chest here and there. I couldn't lie down on my back. And I couldn't go up a flight of stairs without getting winded. Meanwhile, I was a yogi who could touch her toes to her head while doing a handstand at the same time. It didn't add up, right? So I knew something was wrong. And you talked about self-diagnosing. Well, first thing I did when I woke up that morning after a very uncomfortable, restless night was I started Googling my symptoms, and I self-diagnosed with a pulmonary embolism, which is bad enough. I wouldn't entertain the possibility of cancer at the time. I was like, nope, nope. But I called up my doctor and I was like, hi, I need a CT scan this afternoon. And the receptionist is like, it doesn't work like that. You know, she was, she,
Many frustrated people out there know it does not.
it does not work like that. She was like, this crazy girl, what is she talking about? She was like, well, first, you need a reason to get a CT scan. Second, with insurance approval and so on and so forth, there is no chance you're going to get it done today, even if you need one. And I was just like, fine, what's the earliest available appointment you have this afternoon? Because my doctor was in Manhattan and I was in New Jersey at the time. And we were planning like travel to my uncle's funeral and we were leaving the next morning. So I was like, I have to see the doctor today. And so I went in and he sent me down for an x-ray because I had been in 3 months prior with some very minor chest pain, very, very minor. And in a healthy 30-year-old in December, stressed out at her job, you know, I don't blame my doctor for not jumping to cancer at that time. He diagnosed me with a slight inflammation of the lung lining, pleurisy. So I took that diagnosis and then, you know, the winter happened and the cough didn't go away, but it was also winter. I was stressed out and I kept chalking it up to that stuff, but he sent me down for the x-ray and I could have sworn as I left, the x-ray attendant kind of gave me a sideways look as I walked out, but I was like, he's young. Maybe he thinks I'm cute. And so I went upstairs. My doctor
it was probably that. But
so I went upstairs and because my doctor was like, come up, we'll just look at it together. And I felt like he was just trying to appease me, honestly, at first. And he pulled it up and I'm sitting across from him and I see his face just kind of go blank. And then he kind of has a little bit of a look. And then he just quietly turns the screen and he points with his pen. You see this white film over your left lung? I have no idea what that is. It looks like you've run that CT scan after all. And no part of me wanted to be right, but got on the phone with insurance and it happened that very day. So I did get the CT scan and on my way to my uncle's funeral the following day, I got the results. They called me saying I need to schedule a PET scan. I was like, what's a PET scan? They're like, you haven't spoken to your doctor yet? And they're like, I was like, no. She was like, okay. And so she was like, why don't you talk to your doctor and give us a call back when you're ready to schedule? And I was just like, this does not sound good. And so by the time I landed on our layover, I've had the results and I had a grapefruit size growth inside my chest, compressing my heart and my lungs. And it was stage 2B when we finally got all the diagnostics done, but it was very large. And within a week from my CT scan to my PET scan, it had grown a centimeter in each dimension,
wow.
Each direction. So it was growing very rapidly, essentially. So even though I was lucky in that it hadn't spread, like, thank goodness I listened to myself, my intuition and the pain in my shoulder. But yeah, it was dire enough, my particular situation. And then everything flowed from there. So yeah. What about you? What was your diagnostic circumstance?
I will tell you in a minute. First, I want to put you on the spot for a second, Amanda. And I'm going to do this to you all the time. Sorry.
Great.
All right. Can you close your eyes for a second?
Sure.
What went through your brain when you first heard that you had cancer?
So this is when I've got the official call. Well, I suppose because the diagnostic process is its own thing. It's a whole other beast. In many ways, in my mind, it's worse than the actual treatment because you're still in that phase of uncertainty. So do I go by when the surgeon, after I had the PET scan, when the surgeon looked at the results and looked at us and told us this wasn't a job for him? Because I was like, just get this damn thing out of me. Like, open me up, do whatever you got to do. This was a heart surgeon in Manhattan who had operated on one of the presidents. So I was like, he knows what he's doing. Just open me up, get this thing out, whatever the heck it is, And in hindsight, I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. But at the end of the day, he looked at us and was like, this is not a job for me. There's activity on the PET scan. And we were like, what does that mean? And he said, well, my best guess is this is lymphoma. And so that was the first time we officially heard cancer. I mean, if it was in the possible diagnoses of the CT scan, but I have a doctor friend and I sent her the results and she's like, oh, it could just be this, da da da. She was trying not to make me panic without having further stuff, but also, there is a possibility that it could have been something else. And when he said that, part of me knew. And part of me, I think, intuitively already knew, but I didn't want to fully entertain it. And so I had put myself on a cancer healing nutrition plan already, to be really clear. I did all that research when I was at my uncle's funeral. I started drinking green juice. I went raw vegan as soon as I possibly could. That was just what I first came into my field, and I cleansed my body out. So I was already on this cancer healing plan that I had put myself on, even though I was still trying to pretend it wasn't cancer. And then when I had to get a biopsy, and then they asked me that morning, because they had to go right into my chest, right above my heart, next to my lung and my heart. And they came over to my little, gurney where I was lying before the procedure. They're like, we legally just have to make sure you're aware that there is a possibility that we could puncture your heart or your lung during this procedure. And I just lay there and I was just like, well, please just do your jobs well, guys. What else am I supposed to say?
What else can you do at that point?
And I was just lying there And then I got the call from the oncologist a week later saying, we've got the results, preliminary results, confirmed that it is lymphoma. Next week, by your appointment, we'll have the precise form. So it's it was a long run up to confirm, but don't get me wrong. As mentally prepared as I was when I heard the confirmation that it was lymphoma, and it was a very lovely head of the department. He was great about it. But I started crying. I was I was in the middle of my work day technically, and I could barely keep myself together. When the reality of it hit, there's just no way around it. As positive as you are, there's going to be profound levels of emotional roller coaster going on. It was devastating. I was sad. I was scared. I was frustrated. I was angry. It was all the things wrapped up in one. And I also had this layer of guilt there from my sister and my family. I was like, I can't be going through this right now. This isn't fair to my sister. I'm her maid of honor, So there was that layer of real life that was kicking in. And I was like, well, like, what does this mean for me career-wise and all that? When it hits you, it all hits you. When you get that first diagnosis, it all hits you. So as much as I had mentally prepared myself, and I had the luxury of that, I know some people, it happens like this. They go in for pneumonia, and the next thing they know, they're hooked up to chemotherapy. And that's a whole other kind of whirlwind. But yeah, there's just no way around it. It is devastating to get that kind of a diagnosis.
Yeah. And you know, the reason I asked that question, it's a loaded question, because I think about whoever might be listening to us today, and this is always on my mind, as I know it is yours too. What is the experience presently of the person that might be listening? If they could rate their fear on a scale of 1 to 10, they could rate their hope on a scale of 1 to 10. Their optimism, maybe even stronger. Where are they? And you know, I've been in a world where I know a lot of famous people that are friends, and there's a point relative to this. The guys that I run with, they tend to be, like, of all things, like famous WWE wrestlers and UFC fighters, and these are the biggest, like, toughest, most physical guys on the planet. And I can tell you, without exception, every one of them has had as deep a level challenge in their life as anybody has. And their fans, or people that admire them, tend to think that guy's perfect. If he went through it, it wasn't that bad because he is who he is. And, you know, people could look at us now, you especially, and go, wow, they're doing great. So I can't even imagine that they would have been, like, in that same spot that I'm in now. And, you know, I think relatability, which I believe you have to the highest degree, and I hope I do to a degree, is something that will help people that are going through it, that are thinking about what's next for them. When I was diagnosed again, I was 16. My experience was I had pain in my right ball. And by the way, I don't have much of a filter. I don't know if I've told you that. So I hope I don't go wrong.
Oh, I'm not bothered by any of that myself, and hopefully the audience, like, we live in a world of social media.
So my right ball blew up like 3 times the size of my left one, and you know, it happened fast. And I'm like, well, if they're both this size, I'd be doing pretty good. Sorry, inappropriate behavior or language. I'm sorry. There was something really wrong with it. And it hurt. It happened fast. My stepmother took me into my doctor. He immediately got on the phone, called a urologist in the same building, went over to him. I had known the guy for about 2 minutes, Leonard Goldman, who I really came to like and admire over time. Within 2 minutes, he said, that's either a twist, an infection, or a tumor. And whatever it is, it's got to come out tonight. So it was pretty shocking. Now,
so you had that experience of, like, it's all just happening all at once.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I was 16. Nobody knew in the medical field how to talk to a 16-year-old boy at that point. The sensitivity training was not a part of a doctor's regimen back in those days. Some had better bedside manners than others. And ultimately,
let me tell you, it's still lacking for many.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'll call doctors out on that now, by the way, and have fun doing it. But that's a whole, that's all about self-advocacy and all that too, I think, which I think we should talk about at one point for sure.
100%. That could be a whole conversation, I'm sure. Yeah.
Indeed. So when I heard, infection or twist or tumor, I don't think I even knew what a tumor was at that point in my life. That's my recollection now, let alone know what the difference between a benign tumor and a malignant tumor was. But I learned that very quickly within the next few days, because it came out right away. They could see it was a tumor. It went to pathology, and I had a malignant diagnosis within a matter of just a few days. And Amanda, I was a freaking deer in the headlights. I think, you talked about going raw vegan, which is exactly what I would do now. God forbid I ever have that experience again. I think to make things better, my stepmom or my dad probably ran to McDonald's and got me a quarter pounder and a chocolate shake.
A lot of people still go that route now. Yeah. The comfort food, which is actually going to make things far more uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother
Yeah.
podcast discussion for sure. And and by the way, folks, we'll bring on like this is our introductory, so it's Amanda and I today. Sometimes it may be just the two of us, but we're going to bring in some of the most dynamic guests in this field, from nutritionists to hardcore surgeons to the people that are at the apex of, if you want to call it, Eastern healing. So we'll be sharing all of that with you here. So I got a diagnosis quickly. And the first thing they wanted to find out is, did this spread anywhere, or is there an original growth elsewhere? So I went through every diagnostic imaginable at that point. I remember things like bone marrow, not transplant, bone marrow examination, where basically they have to bust through your cartilage in your lower back to pull
I
out.
had to do that.
You know that, and I remember today it sounded like the Rice Krispies when you pour the milk on it. So there's like just all these different things that I remember. It was a whirlwind. It was shocking. Ultimately, they got the testicular cancer in that one operation, but we found out there was a whole specific separate point of origination in my right lung. And so that's why I had two different cancer diagnoses at the same time.
Wow.
The diagnosis on the right was stage 4, and I ended up over the next 3 years having another 3 major surgeries. Ultimately, they took about 70% of both of my lungs, so I've got about 30% left. All these years. But keep in mind that I went on to play tennis at a competitive level. Not great, but good. I fought. You know, I learned. I went on to be a fighter and do some pro wrestling matches, and you know, the kinds of things that you wouldn't think you could do post stage 4 lung cancer with 30% of your lungs. And this is why, like, I'm such a believer now, and that you really can take where you are and go pretty much just about anywhere with it. But back to the mindset at that time, for anybody else out there right now who might be scared about where they are, what they're going through, or what a loved one is going through, I don't know that it would have been possible to be any more freaked out and any more unprepared, and resultingly any angrier than I was at that point in my life, and that I was for about the next 2 years after that. And still I try to do until I started to learn other ways. So it was it was a dark time.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. And it's also for me just highlighting how wonderfully complementary our journeys have been, as far as like very different and coming from very different perspectives, and yet we're also bringing it together and kind of like full circle. It's all funneled us in the same direction. So yeah, hopefully this is going to resonate on a lot of different levels with people out there listening, because there's, again, every experience is different. And there are commonalities to the experience that unite us all on some level. It's like some people only have the chemo, some people only have the surgery, some people only have the radiation, some people have all 3. And, you know, some people looked at me like, oh my God, I can't believe you went through that. And I had 600 hours of chemotherapy. By comparative measures, some people have 6 rounds of 45 minutes or something like that. But that's just it. There is no comparing apples for apples on this journey, because I look at other people, I'm like, I can't believe you had brain surgery. I can't believe you had that, you know? And so it's just this like crazy, I'm like, I feel like I'm lucky compared to a lot of people. And so other people would look at me and say, oh my God, I'm so lucky I didn't go through that. So I just want to like presence that too. Like there's no room for comparing one journey to the next. It's all not fun. And we all have our own really, really traumatic, really, really dark moments that we go through, no matter how positive we are, no matter how well we came out on the other end. And let me tell you, I was positive throughout, and there were some moments that I just like fell deep into the dark hole. And oh gosh, the bone marrow biopsy, like I actually had a physiological traumatic reaction to the biopsy itself. Like I stopped breathing, turned purple, woke up to oxygen mask on my face. Like it was because it bored into my being, and I think it triggered other trauma. That's a whole other episode too, the trauma layer underlying a lot of cancer perhaps. But what I also wanted to say was like, I also had an infection at one point in my PICC line, and it took a while to figure out where that was coming from. So one of my rounds, I went into the ER with a fever of 103 or 4, might have even been close to 105 at one point before I even started the round. And for a few days, they didn't know. So I was in the hospital for like 9 days that time instead of like 4. And I went into that round already incredibly depleted. I had rigors, like my body had seized up. I wasn't sleeping well that entire time throughout treatment. So, I really had a rose-colored glass lens view of the whole thing. Sunshine state of mind was a hashtag I used a lot. Making lemonade out of lemons was something else that I spoke into a lot. And I wasn't denying that it was also very, very challenging. I was being really real about it. And throughout the recovery process afterward, too, there were some moments of complete and utter frustration. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Like, I feel like I've been on top of this / ahead of it this whole time. And yet I'm still struggling with really intense chemo brain, like blanking out, brain fog to a whole other level, gut issues. I had so much fatigue, like it's not even funny. And I feel like that's kind of minimal compared to some people. Me being on top of it already, it was really challenging. So yeah, and then there's the emotional layers, like the time of my life. Like I didn't, I had to do a different, like take a different career path. It was both liberating and terrifying. And there was just so many things that were impacted. And then the fear of, there's the woman level of chemotherapy impacting your ability to bear children in the future. And so there was that layer of fear and stuff like that. So, they have a lot of protective measures these days, but there's so much that you have to recalibrate to on this journey, even with a positive outlook, even with resources, even with the mind frame to know how to heal your body and everything. It is full of challenges. So I'm not trying to sit here and pretend like it was easy for me to get to this point of being like whole and healthy and embodied again. But yeah, it really was beautiful and liberating and intense. There's just an undeniable intensity that comes along with it, no matter your outlook.
That's incredible and admirable. And if we can help anybody out there, but come to that place or raise their degree of coming to that place, then that's amazing. I think we'll have to draw a lot more on your experience than mine. I think mine might be more of a cautionary tale of what not to do while you're going through it. But where I am now, I had a second 3-year illness from 2013 to 2016, not cancer related. And it was a whole different world for me at that point. I treated it in a much different way. And we don't have to go into what that was all about now or even later.